Howdy, folks. Today we're going to be looking at an anti-trans propaganda film by Epoch TV called Gender Transformation. It's a bit of a long one, so we're going to get right into it, but first, a heads up. This film deals with some difficult topics, including gaslighting, victim blaming, several kinds of assault, and unaliving. If you're not in a headspace to handle these topics, take care of yourself. You can always come back and watch this another time, or contact me and we can discuss things in a more user-friendly environment. This is a hard one for me too, as you'll see as the film goes on, but it's really, really important. Now let's get to it, and as always, thank you so much for watching and being part of this community.
My name is Kali Fontania, and I am a former public school teacher of 15 years.
Okay, Callie Fontania. Let's have a look at that. So the Exodus Institute is a homeschool program. What does that mean, though? Notice that it says fully accredited K-12 grade online school, taught by experienced and credentialed teachers. Okay, cool. Christian values, and not great, but that happens a lot with homeschool. No political agendas or woke indoctrination. Okay, here's their Twitter. I teach classes against communism and other leftist indoctrination at the online school I founded with my wife. Remember, no politics, no indoctrination. Here's another one. These are the kinds of lessons we give in our enrichment program. Here's Joshua with a short video that shows a dinosaur skeleton and talks about evidence of a global flood. The post goes on to say, we highlight the problems with evolution and show the evidence for creation and intelligent design. No politics, no indoctrination. This next one, the entire narrative of January 6th is a lie. No politics, no indoctrination. January 6th is a lie. At Exodus Institute, we teach students how to recognize the news media lies like this. No politics, no indoctrination, but we're going to take something that is actual fact and tell your students it is a lie, and then show them how to identify that it's a lie, but no indoctrination, no politics. March 19th, 2022. Joshua got locked out of his account for basically being a TERF, as far as I can tell. He doesn't outright say, but when people use that phrasing, the biological version of 2 + 2 = 4, yeah, you're probably being very, very transphobic, but whatever. So he got perma-banned from Facebook and TikTok and suspended on Twitter. He's on Truth Social, though, where there's no censorship of ideas, by which he means there's no accountability for hate speech. But whatever. Get your kids out of these indoctrination camps. I agree. If your kid is in Exodus Institute or something like it, get them out of that indoctrination camp. Okay, let's go on.
Our public schools have changed. 5 years ago, there was no students that were identifying as non-binary. Gender fluid was not something that we even knew about.
The fact that Callie did not know about a thing does not mean that thing did not exist. Also, students I can't speak for her school district, but students not identifying as a thing when they don't have the terminology to describe themselves that way should not be surprising. I, as a lifelong trans person, did not have the terminology to identify myself as such when I was in school. So of course I did not identify myself as such using those terms I did not have. Duh.
We're also having an epidemic of girls transitioning more than boys.
Okay, that's going to vary from area to area. The best information I was able to find is linked in the description. It's a decades-long study of a gender clinic where they had thousands of people go through. And TLDR on that one, they found that roughly twice as many people transitioned from male to female than from female to male. But again, this district that Callie's talking about may be different.
A lot of the children and teenagers and high schoolers that are questioning their gender and having gender identity crisis are being driven by the teachers.
Being driven by the teachers. Okay, first of all, citation needed, but also remember that, because that story's going to change later on.
I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of parents.
This is Erin Friday. Who the heck is Erin Friday? Well, I am glad you asked. She is an anti-transgender extremist. She's like a TERF on steroids. She's affiliated with an anti-trans group called Our Duty. She was a practicing lawyer, but when her child, which we know very little about, according to Friday, we only get her side of the story on this. After public schools gave her education, the child began identifying as pansexual, then non-binary, then transmasculine around 2020. In response, Erin Friday quit her job and started a multi-year campaign to isolate the child. She took the child out of school. She broke off all of the kids' friendships, took away internet, phone, basically locked the child in a little box. The child ran away. When that wasn't sufficient, shipped the child off to be with out-of-state relatives who had no access or contact to anything, and eventually resorted to sending the child to work camps. And according to her, and this is a quote, "I sent her to camps where she would have to do physical work all day long." According to Friday, the child eventually desisted in 2022. She tortured this child for years until she finally gave up. Awesome parenting.
I wish I had a phone. My mom would know.
Okay, when we get into, you can tell when we're in the fictionalized narrative, because you get those little bars on the top and bottom, the cinema screen thing. This is loosely based on the story of Andrew Martinez. It's a very tragic story, and spoiler alert, it ends badly. But this is pre-transition Andrew, fictionalized as a character named Evan/Evelyn. And we're taking that element from Erin's story and incorporating it into the narrative. This, my mom wouldn't let me have a phone. And this is where things start to change a little bit, and you'll see why shortly.
Never allow it. Yeah, she's so weird for that. I mean, she thinks I'd get distracted.
So today we're gonna talk a bit about genders. You know, the term gender identity, it was coined by psychiatrist professor Robert J. Stoller in 1964. And
that is true as far as it goes. Robert Stoller coined the term. But again, the terms we use today are the labels we put on things, the nouns we assign to stuff to facilitate easy communication. That does not mean the ideas that we now define as gender identity are brand new or, 100 years old, as the case may be. Stoller was affiliated with UCLA Medical School and founded a gender clinic out there. That'll be important in a second. But he's not the first. He's the first to talk about it as a psychologist or psychiatrist. He's the first to coin the term. But we see evidence of gender identity being separate from biological sex, going back all through history. In the early 1900s, in Germany, there were clinics where a person could have gender reassignment surgery. There were, in the Weimar Republic, transgender individuals were issued a special ID card that exempted them from the cross-dressing laws that were in place at the time, because a person who was transgender would wear the clothing of the gender they were rather than the gender they were assigned at birth. So this was not only acknowledged, it was a thing that actually had its own ID cards. But that's not the only relevant part of history. There are documented cases going back and back and back. If you've ever heard of or care to Google a being known as Public Universal Friend, that was a non-binary individual who existed very, very publicly in, over a century ago. And it goes further. There's a Roman emperor who is on record in the historical record as wanting to find a surgeon to perform a gender reassignment surgery. And there's more. I just recently did a video about transgender and non-binary genders in the Talmud, the ancient Jewish religious tradition. There are defined terms for people who change their gender through human intervention. That's thousands of years ago. That's what today we would call a post-op transgender person. And that's acknowledged in the Talmud. How much more does one need to see that this is not a thing that just happened in 1964? We have always been around, and the more primitive ancient cultures handled it better than we are today.
Then it was popularized by psychologist John Money. He was one of the first researchers to publish theories about how societal constructs of gender influence the individual formation of gender identity.
That's important. Yes, John Money was an early popularizer in the field of psychology and behavior, and he published theories. But his theory was that gender was a completely social construct. And we'll see why that's important in a second.
And this is where gender affirming care comes from. In fact, the only study intended to prove this theory of gender.
This is Miriam Grossman. She's gross. And I'll tell you why in a second. First of all, misleading. John Money is not where the idea of gender affirming care comes from. It's where the terms for things that have always been happening through all of human history come from. John Money put them into the literature much the same way Darwin put the ideas of evolution into the scientific zeitgeist. But it deals with things that humans have known about as long as there have been humans. John Money popularized those labels, but they're things that we have always done. But that's a whole other thing. Okay, who is Miriam Grossman? I'll let her speak for herself for a second.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier.
So, yes, she's immediately speaking out of her field. She is a psychiatrist. She is an author. She is not an endocrinologist. She is not an embryologist. She is not a geneticist. She is simply asserting something that is scientifically not true because she isn't working in that field. She's using her credentials to pass off her personal opinions as if they weighed as much as actual science. So, what does that actually mean? What is actually going on? Sex is assigned at birth is a somewhat problematic phrase because a person can't be assigned a sex, right? You have what you have. Even if you're an intersex person, you have what you have. But the thing about that is that in biology, there are several different ways sex is determined. Sometimes it's chromosomes, sometimes it's gamete size, sometimes it's visible external genitalia. There are 6 or 7 different ways. None of them have only 2 options, and they don't always match. So when you are assigning sex, you're actually estimating sex. You're saying, based on the information I have available right now, we're not doing karyotypes on babies, we're not checking hormone levels on babies, we're just observing the external genitalia and making a guess. So that's how sex is assigned. The same thing happens On the other end of things, when a forensic anthropologist looks at bones, there's a whole bunch of different markers, diagnostic characteristics, but you almost never end up with a skeleton that has all the markers for maleness. There's 47 different criteria, possibly more. And some of them will show up as male and some of them will show up as female, and they go to size, density. There's a bunch of different things. But nobody is textbook male or textbook female. So a forensic anthropologist makes an estimate of the probable sex of the person whose bones they are. We don't actually know. There is no tag anywhere on the human body that says this unit formed male or whatever. And once again, there's also intersex individuals, people with mutations, people with anomalies. There are so many exceptions, it would take forever just to go through all of those. So, Dr. Grossman is not only out of her depth, she is very, very wrong. And that was just a clip of the testimony she gave in Congress. Let's see what else she has to say.
Gender identity being separate from biology failed miserably, and that was the study that John Money did with the famous twins, the Reamer twins.
Okay, quick note on the Reamer twins. One of the twins, you know what, I'll let her introduce it, and then I'll correct her.
One of them had a accident. His penis was burnt off. His parents were at a loss of how to raise him, what to do with him. And they turned to the gender expert at the time, John Money, and John Money told them, not a problem, raise him as a girl. He's only 18 months old. He's going to need some operations. He's going to need some hormones, but he will be comfortable as a woman. But Money did not report that his experiment that spanned 10 years was an abysmal failure. He reported that it was a success.
Indeed. Notice that Miriam didn't say that it was an abysmal failure. She said that he did not report it was an abysmal failure. Now, how you define success is a little bit ishy, because what happened was, with those twins, accounts vary, but the most reliable information seems to be there was a problem during the circumcision, and one of them ended up losing his external genitalia. So John Money, who was recognized as an expert at the time, he ran a clinic. John Money was a proponent of the idea that gender is entirely a social construct. There's no nature to it whatsoever. So in order to test his theory and help out the child if he was right, he proposed the idea that they should raise that twin as female. Because if your body appears female and all of culture tells you you're female, then you must be a female, right? Well, not really. That child grew up and persistently throughout the course of his life understood that there was a mishmash between what they felt, what they knew about themselves, and what everyone else in the outside world was telling them. They knew that there was something wrong about what they were being told who they were is. Roughly 10 years later, that person unalived themselves. And that's why Dr. Grossman says it was a failure. But the thing of it is it straight up proved that there is an innate element, gender, that you can't just be told who you are and you're fine with it. You can't, even with, Miriam would put it as, you can't give a person surgeries and give a person hormones and have it change who they are. Well, that's true, but not in the way she thinks. You can't have a person be who you tell them they are. You can't be other than who you are, no matter how many people, including Miriam Grossman, tell you otherwise.
And he was also the first to establish a clinic where he could perform gender reassignment surgeries for people who suffer from gender dysphoria.
He was one of the first in the United States. Again, remember, this is propaganda we're looking at, so every sentence is carefully crafted to mislead the viewer. The way they phrase it is important. Saying he is the first to establish a gender clinic gives this impression that this was not a thing that existed prior to 1964. The newer we make it, the more trendy it seems, and the less backed in actual science it seems to be. That's not how that works. Even if it were brand new, that doesn't mean the science is automatically bad, but it is very much not brand new.
Does anyone know what that is? Yes, Sarah.
It means if you're like born as a boy, but you're actually a girl in a boy's body, right?
Yes, that's correct, Sarah. Very good. And it can also be the other way around, of course.
Again, it's a docudrama kind of thing, so I can almost forgive the teacher character for portraying it this way. Oh, there's only a binary. You can only go from male to female or female to male. Those are the only options. That's not true. It has never been true, and I mean that literally. All the way back to the Talmud, there are genders for non-binary people who don't fit in the binary at all. So this is a thing that's always been known about as well. But it does demonstrate that the script writers, their narrow conception of what gender activists are saying is really, really off base.
I always knew I was really a girl, you know, I just went to salon.
Billy.
Huh?
Do you think you're funny?
Who's Billy?
What do you mean, who's Billy?
I'm Becky now.
This is real. Why are you even joking about this?
Yeah, don't be so disrespectful. We're trying to learn here.
Okay, Karen.
Hey. You know, what is funny to you might be really serious to someone else. If any of you feel unsure about your gender identity, you should know that it is normal. And we are here to support you.
And that's the gotcha moment where the seed is planted in this character's mind, that the school is there to open a door and make something possible that wouldn't otherwise have been possible. And it gets really, really twisted. But also that little bit with that Billy character, because while it's shouted down, the fact that it's in there, it's a little nod, it's a little dog whistle to the people who, like Ben Shapiro, who seem to think that a person can just put on a wig and a dress and declare themselves to be a woman and then go do horrible things because they are a predator, not a trans person. It's this false equivalency. It's dismissed to say, no, we don't believe that. But the fact they included it when they did not have to is a nod to people like that.
My name is Abigail Martinez. At the age of, 13, I believe is when she was struggling with depression.
Okay, so this is Andrew's mom talking about pre-transition Andrew. We see where we've got the black bars, we're back into the fictionalized narrative where we get the fictional characters who represent Andrew, Evan/Evelyn, depending on where we are, and depression. And we're throwing away the violin. This was once a vibrant, creative child who's now tossing aside all that made them wonderful in favor of these dark things they're learning about at school. And also worth noting that Andrew's mother is still misgendering Andrew.
Hey, how was school, honey?
Fine.
I made your favorite dish.
I'm not hungry.
Ooh, moody teen, darkness ensues.
What she needed was mental health to find out why she was struggling.
So why didn't you get her mental health help? If you're sure that's what she needed, why did you not do that?
When did you start feeling this way?
I look at my brother and everything seems so easy for him. And I just feel confused.
Do you think you'd be happier as a boy?
Maybe.
You should join this club. I think they can really help you for this.
Probably.
So that was the school counselor, and we're there's a bunch of things tied into this. Remember, we don't have any information about what happened to Andrew, what Andrew went through. This is entirely the script writers and the testimonies from Andrew's mom put together to weave a narrative of what may have happened. So the school counselor in this completely fictionalized incident says to Evelyn, do you think maybe you'd be happier as a boy? Because it's the school who's pushing this stuff. It's not the kids who say, I don't feel right. I feel like, I've always been a boy or a girl or neither or whatever. No. The idea is being put in their head. And we saw Evelyn light up. Maybe. And then the counselor hands her a flyer and says, here, go join this club. Maybe it'll help. It's layer upon layer of bullshit. And it's important to point it out because it's entirely fictional. We have no actual human who was there who can testify to that stuff. It's items from other people's lives being woven in to create this overall narrative.
In about junior high, their bodies are changing and they are.
Christy Lozano, who the hell are you? Well, let's have ourselves a little look. Christy Lozano was a school teacher in the general Santa Barbara area. Here is the Santa Barbara Independent. And she ran for superintendent of schools. Here's Christy's LinkedIn. She was actually a school teacher for 18 years, if this resume is correct. Coastline Christian Academy. But she also ran for public office and failed a couple of times. One other minor detail. Her education is with the Ministry Training College. She got an advanced diploma of ministry in divinity/ministry.
Are so confused by what they are. The most dangerous thing about this culturally responsive curriculum is it trains a child's mind to think a certain way. Once kids' brains have been trained in that way, unless they go through some serious therapy, you probably will not undo that type of thinking.
What kind of therapy, Christy? Could it be the kind that starts with conversion? It's fascinating that she phrases it that way, because if you raise a child in any particular kind of thinking, they will often take to that thinking, and then they'll need deprogramming to get away from that. If you raise them up in a Christian school full of indoctrination and science denial and anti-evolution and so forth, they're going to need some deprogramming to get over that. That's why there is the deconstruction movement today, because people realize they had been brainwashed into believing bullshit. And it takes time to get past all that and really start to reclaim control of your own life. That's one of the reasons that fighting back against religion, particularly religious extremism and the indoctrination of children, and trans rights, are really, really closely meshed for me. She talks about how you have to deprogram children from having learned critical thinking. But that's equally true for the indoctrination in religious thinking, in doubt your doubts, in believe the Bible, in don't question.
When my daughter adopted her gender identity, she came out as trans. Her mental health just dropped with it. She got very despondent and depressed.
She would, wouldn't she? Now, the way Aaron Friday is painting the picture is it was the child identifying as trans that caused them to become despondent and depressed. But remember, Aaron's reaction to the child coming out was to cut off all her friendships, to cut off all of her connections with the outside world, to take her out of school, to isolate her, to send her out of state, to send her to work camps. Gee, do you suppose that might possibly cause some feelings of despondency? Maybe? No, it must have been the gender identity.
My name is Chloe Cole. I medically transitioned as a minor between the ages of 13 and 16.
Chloe Cole. We've talked about Chloe Cole before. We've seen Chloe a few different times because Chloe's profession is appearing in things like this, in going to state capitals and giving testimony in order to try to keep anyone from having access to gender-based healthcare. That is Chloe Cole's career. I do feel bad for Chloe because Chloe is a detransitioner. Chloe started to transition, realized it wasn't right for her, and detransitioned. And there are permanent consequences for Chloe. And that's really, really unfortunate. But the fact that people made a mistake with Chloe doesn't mean that it being trans is not true for anyone ever. And it's really, really unfortunate because I want to have sympathy for Chloe, but she puts so much effort into fucking over everyone else that it's really hard. Now, Chloe says here that she medically transitioned at 13. Not exactly. Chloe began puberty blockers around 13, which is a step on the process of medical transition, but it's not like Chloe went directly to bottom surgery at 13. That's not a thing that happens. Puberty blockers, I should point out, are used for a number of reasons. They're also used to deal with precocious puberty, when puberty starts far too early and causes problems for a child.
The reason why I wanted to be a boy was never really explored throughout the duration of my entire transition, actually. A lot of my teachers and some school staff would tell my parents, like, hey, your kid has some autistic symptoms and I think you should get her checked out.
This is important. It creates the picture saying nobody asked why I wanted to be a boy and teacher said I had autistic symptoms. The viewer is meant to create the link that Chloe wasn't trans, but was autistic. These are not mutually exclusive. I myself am a spectrum person. If my childhood had happened today, I would probably, depending on how good my school system was, have been flagged as autistic. You can be both autistic and trans. It's not a one or the other kind of thing. It's not, oh, you're not really trans, you're actually autistic. No. But being autistic means it changes how you view things, how what people tell you gets internalized. There's a huge variation. It's an umbrella term, really, not a specific diagnosis. Why would a therapist question why you think you're a boy? It'll come up throughout the course of this thing. The idea that a person might be depressed or they might have this other various factors, bipolar or ADHD or any number of other things. And that's what was causing their problems rather than being trans. You can have multiple things going on at once. Almost every human does. You could say very similar things about a cis person. Oh, well, they weren't really cis. They weren't really the gender they were assigned at birth. They were just depressed or they were just autistic. When you turn the tables, it becomes obvious how fucking absurd this is.
But when they did, my pediatrician would just tell them, would just completely dismiss this concern.
My name is Abel Garcia. I currently live in Dallas, Texas. I'm a male-to-female detransitioner, doubting myself as a man or a boy at the time. That made some sense at the time, and said, well, I must be a woman. And
that's sort of what I mean, is Abel Garcia. We've met him before in a previous video. He says, I had doubts. I didn't know if I was really a man. And so I was told, maybe you're a transgender woman. Because of the way autism affects his particular mind. If you are not this thing, you must be this thing. But that also doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't trans. If he's the one asserting it, then how is someone else to know? No one else can know what's in another person's mind, you know?
Decided to go see a therapist, see what was going on, if I was truly a woman in a man's body, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. I told the therapist, I think I might be transgender, but I don't really know and I need your help. Immediately, she affirmed me as a transgender woman. And when I asked her why so quickly, she said she did not want to gatekeep me. And she had my letter to transition right away with hormones on my first session with her.
So we have only Abel's testimony to go by for this. It may be true. Doctors sometimes rush things, sometimes make mistakes. There are doctors who are bad doctors. That does not mean all of medical science is incompetent.
The trans thing, I think, is a great excuse to avoid issues that are really painful. And if a therapist is affirming...
Pamela Garfield Yeager. Pamela Garfield Yeager is a conservative American therapist and activist in the anti-vaccine movement and also the ex-transgender movements. Yes, she's an anti-vaxxer. What the heck is an ex-transgender? It's not the same as a detransitioner, because a detransitioner is simply a person who's transitioned twice, effectively. They transitioned, and then they untransitioned, but that's a second transition. You follow? An ex-transgender is a person who detransitioned and very vocally regrets it and tries to prevent other people from gaining access to that kind of healthcare because it was wrong for them personally. Therefore, it is wrong for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Which is kind of disgusting. Pamela Garfield Yeager is an advocate for that group. Pamela Garfield Yeager is an ambassador for Turning Point USA, whom you may be familiar with as an American nonprofit promoting conservatism in high schools, colleges, and university campuses. All right, now let's see what she has to say.
Therapy, the one person who's supposed to help you actually face things that are painful, then that's going to send them more into this trans path because that's what feels good in the short term.
So when I was working in Palo Alto as the site director of the counseling program there,
I tried to look into this. I could not confirm, but I couldn't refute it either. She may have been the director of perhaps the school guidance office, I guess, or maybe there's a separate division where just the licensed clinical social workers worked and she was the director of that unit. It's really, really hard to say, but let's just go with it for the sake of the story.
I was actually in charge of a private secret LGBT group where we didn't tell the parents that we were running this group for kids to come and figure out their identities. I was so naive, I didn't see the harm of it at the time. I thought I was helping kids understand who they are without the interference of their families.
She says that she ran a secret group that the parents didn't know about, that nobody knew about. Maybe, but we have only her word for it. I'm not sure how the heck that's supposed to be possible, though, because if you're running a group in a school, somebody's gonna notice, and if you don't have authorization from administration, somebody's gonna have a problem with it. But maybe, who knows? But again, we only have her word for it. It was secret, so of course there's no records, which is, an awfully convenient thing to say when somebody wants to make things up, perhaps. But okay, let's go on. We're back in the fictional narrative. We're incorporating what Pamela just said into the story of our fictionalized version of Andrew to explain how things came to be the way they finally worked out for Andrew.
We put these flyers around the school. It didn't disclose a time or a place. We told them to come to our office and we'd do a little screening, a little interview, and then we'd secretly tell them when and where the group was. And then we'd tell them that they didn't have to tell their parents and that we wouldn't tell their parents. In fact, we didn't even tell the teachers or the administration of the school. They didn't even know.
So it was an illegal, non-official club. It was like Fight Club. The first rule of LGBT club is you don't talk about LGBT club. Uh-huh. Okay, I believe you. For sure.
That's how secret it was.
I am Kaden. I'm trans. I was born Cleo, but like growing up, I always felt like something was missing. Was pretty depressed. I'm so grateful, I'm so happy today that I found this, and you know, I was able to transition into like myself, I guess.
Again, this is a fictional narrative. This is the part that the scriptwriters put together. And they had this Caden character say, I'm so happy I got to transition into myself, my true self, I guess. That's painting this picture of uncertainty of, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm doing what I think is expected of me based on the group around me and what's being put onto me and all that. It's entirely fictional. The script writers picked those words. That's not something a real person said.
So this was a group where they basically gathered vulnerable children and taught them that it was us against them because their family wouldn't understand them. They were now victims because they were in this now selected group, the LGBTQ group.
As many of you who've been around for a long time may be aware, my oldest actually founded an LGBTQ group in their high school before they graduated. The school did not have one. There were a couple of Christian clubs that were starting to get a little hostile towards rainbow people. So to counter that, to spread correct information, and to give people a place where they could, you know, exist without being hated, my oldest and another trans student formed an LGBT group. This was out in the open. There was an administrator in charge who signed off. There was always a teacher present. You know, it was all on the books. It's perfectly legitimate. So maybe it doesn't count as one of these secret groups, but whatever. This us against them thing. Since I happen to know an individual who founded such a group, I sent this clip where Pamela makes this claim to them and asked for their thoughts. And this is what they had to say. One, we're not like gathering children. At my high school, it's just whoever wanted to be there. I knew a solid handful of gay people that I'd never met come to a meeting. It's just whoever wanted to show up and show support. Two, in a way, it is a group that's there as a safe place for people with parents that don't understand them. And sort of the entire film existing also proves that there's a lot of people who don't understand trans people still, which also reinforces the need for these groups. They go on to say, a couple of years ago, I did a presentation on LGBTQ plus self-harm and hate crime rates, and one of the main sources used was the Trevor Project survey, which asked questions about how accepted people feel and just sort of their general social support environment. And they found, especially with trans youths, their self-harm rate, which I'm using in the euphemistic sense for YouTube purposes, is nearly 50%. I haven't seen one for 2023 yet, but the one that I looked at, I think it was 42%. So, having those places for trans people just to exist as themselves literally saves lives. I've also included a link to the Trevor Project in the description. This year's survey is out. Well, last year's now. It's 2023. And it's not good. People who considered unaliving themselves in the past year, the lowest number is cisgender men at 25%. This world is very hostile to everyone. Everyone's mental health is in a bad place. But do bear in mind, the lowest group is 25%. And this year's survey encompassed 28,000 LGBTQ young people ages 13 to 24. So it's a relatively large sample size. And we're looking at 25%. The highest group was transgender men at 56%, and this is considering unaliving. 23% of transgender men attempted, 16% of transgender women, 17% of non-binary or genderqueer, 14% questioning, 8% cisgender women, 6% cisgender men. So the rate for transgender men, 4 times that of cisgender men. And also, it's very important to note there is a definite survivorship bias. The people who reported attempts are the people who were not successful. Only the ones who lived to report.
Transgender, it sounds so harmless.
Jennifer Bilek. Who is Jennifer Bilek? I found Jennifer's Twitter. It turns out Jennifer is a conspiracy theorist and portrait painter. BJ Portraits, exposing the gender industry. And she's got a bunch of, I've appeared on this, I've spoken to this person, and also some unhinged rants. But first, let's hear what she has to say.
We have to ask the right questions in order to get to what's really happening here. Why are they promoting this all across the Western world? For a fraction.
Pause. This is a survey from Sky News that shows that 72% of people are very comfortable with people, transgender women, using women's toilets. I don't know why they chose this particular thing. There's nothing super remarkable here. It shows relatively good progress and general social acceptance. This is super majority levels of acceptance. So even people who feel uncomfortable or threatened by transgender women are going to be less inclined to harm women who try to use the women's restroom because of the social pressure.
For a fraction of the population, like not even 1% of the population.
Right. Her question. Why are they doing this? Why are they, proactively pushing this agenda of accepting people and not hurting them for a fraction of the population, like not even 1%? There's 2 issues. The first is that that's not even remotely accurate. Getting actual hard data on the percentage of transgender individuals in the United States, in the world, whatever, it's hard because not everybody is out. A lot of people are still in the closet. A lot of people might be out socially, but they won't respond to a survey, or they won't respond to a government inquiry, or a random person on the street like conspiracy theorist Jennifer here. So we don't know for sure. The Williams Institute did estimates based on various self-response surveys, so forth. Healthline, I forget if it was Healthline or Pew, one of those 2 I linked below. But they find that somewhere around 1.4, 1.6 of adults are transgender. According to Statista, a survey conducted in 2021 found that 97.3% of people identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, meaning 2.7% of people don't. 2.7% maybe? Question mark? But so what? That's not an argument. That's like saying, oh, they want to end slavery for a fraction of the population, like 11%. What does it matter? If something is wrong, you want to fix it. Badur. But also, she's telling on herself a little bit here, because the rate of detransitioners, the rate of people who regret, again, numbers are very, very hard to pin down, but meta-studies of multiple surveys have found that it's roughly around 1%. And most of those detransitioned due to social pressure, due to lack of acceptance from friends and family, not because they actually feel differently. So, what is Jennifer doing here? What are all of these anti-trans advocates doing here for a group of people who is less than a fraction of 1% of that 1% she's mad about? What is she fighting for if she thinks it's stupid to fight for only 1% of the people?
That has intense body dysphoria about their genitalia. I mean, certainly.
Point of order, gender dysphoria is not body dysphoria. And being a trans person doesn't necessarily mean you have dysphoria about your genitals. It's not about the plumbing, Jennifer.
Other people have body dysphoria.
We don't realize the impact that social media is having on our kids and what it's developing in their character.
Now this is where things start to change. Remember, at the beginning, it was the teachers. The teachers are pushing it. The counselors are pushing it. It's the schools. Now we're going to start to spin it. It's social media pushing it.
TikTok has really become a phenomenon for people that are questioning their gender to go viral.
TikTok has really became. I don't want to, be that person with the red pen and the nitpicking and whatnot. But the entire reason Callie is in this documentary is because she is an educator of 15 years who now runs her own school. What the hell was that sentence? This is a scripted, edited film. What even was that?
There's been studies by Lisa Littman and also the National Academy of France who were...
Okay. New character, because, cohesive narratives, who needs them, right? First of all, who is Dr. Michael Laidlaw? Michael Laidlaw is an endocrinologist and anti-transgender activist. He works as both a doctor and as a hired expert. He gets paid in order to testify in favor of bans on gender-affirming care. In fact, he has done so in Alabama and Florida, and he's compensated for this kind of testimony. He also writes articles to this effect and generally, frankly, is a shill for the conservatives. But he's also a working doctor, so he doesn't have no credibility. Now, he mentioned Lisa Littman. You may have heard the name before. She got into a little bit of trouble in 2016, she coined a term, rapid onset gender dysphoria. That's when a person suddenly seems to experience gender dysphoria. The reason it's problematic is because there's two sides to it. On the one hand, there's the people who, like the people who produce this documentary, like the people who appear in this documentary, for lack of a better term, this fictional tale pretending to be a documentary. There's this idea that you're exposed to the social contagion of transness, and then you suddenly internalize it and change your whole life around and cause irreversible damage, which is the name of a book by Abigail Schreier that popularized this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria. But the other side of it is a person could have always been trans, and only after being exposed to the terminology was suddenly able to articulate what it is they're feeling and experiencing. I relate very much to that because, as I've stated in an earlier video, I have always been who I am, but I didn't have words to tell people what that meant until after I'd already finished high school.
We're very concerned about social media influence. When you have that out there and you have compliant clinics across the country to treat these kids, then you have a pipeline.
Oh, here we go. We have a pipeline now. So there's this medical literature that suggests that trans people are real, and it's accepted. It's spread around. It's in the journals. It's established fact. And then you have the social media spreading the idea that trans people are real and exist. Well, now you've got compliant clinics, and now there's a pipeline because there's a thing that exists, and there's people who fit the description of that thing. They also exist, and now there's clinics. So it's a pipeline. Yes, makes total sense.
Mr. Robinson has been discouraging to both me and Joshua, saying that like this is just a phase. Like he's refused to call us by our pronouns or ask other students about their pronouns.
Once again, we're back in the fictionalized story. Caden, who is a fictional character, in the secret LGBT group that is not actually part of Andrew's story. So we've got a fictional character inside a fictional scenario, inside of a fictional plug put in a real person's fictionalized story in order to fill in the gaps that nobody knows because that person never told anyone. This is about as reliable as the Bible right now, but okay. So this fictional character within the multi-fictional scenario, the fictionception, if you will, is mad about pronouns. Cool.
This is not the first complaint regarding Mr. Robinson. I'll bring it up at the school board. All remember this, to ask for someone's pronouns is the most basic way to show respect.
It's our fundamental human rights.
Yeah. If I were to
So yeah, we have to show Caden getting carried away and being like, oh, pronouns are a fundamental human right, and everybody agrees eagerly. Oh, look how out in left field these people really are. Except it's layer upon fiction, upon fiction, upon fiction. This is from the scriptwriters' minds. This is their idea of what may have happened if all these fictional elements were woven together. So to say this is a characterization of what these people are really like is just brain-bustingly bad.
explore with a person about why they believe they're in the wrong body, that would be considered conversion therapy. My license would now be under threat. These lawmakers are stopping people like me to be able to do my job properly.
So yeah, that's a common complaint. If you dare to ask anybody about anything, then it's classified as conversion therapy and you'll lose your license and you'll go to jail and yada yada. Nope. It's entirely made up. Entirely made up. There are a few specific passages in California law that refer specifically to gender identity, and they almost always have to do with things like a health insurance program cannot discriminate against a person based on gender identity. Just like the secret LGBT groups that took place in the schools without even the administrators knowing, it's mostly made up.
The teachers union said, if you're a teacher and you don't affirm a child's gender identity, if you're not going to go along with the pronouns and make sure that child feels accepted for their new chosen gender, or maybe they're changing gender throughout the year because these kids do sometimes flip-flop on what.
So Kaylee's saying a lot that's very wrong in every parenthetical. She's painting it like, oh, these kids with their new chosen gender. No, the fact that they've decided to open up and tell you about the gender they have always been does not make it new. And then we got to throw in the gender fluid. Oh, they're flip-flopping, they're not sure. No, that denotes a fundamental misunderstanding of what the hell is going on. A gender fluid individual is not a person who's confused and can't make up their mind. It's a person who understands they don't belong on one end of the binary or other. And instead of like some who just set the whole binary aside and say, I'm not taking any part, they kind of revel in it. They're like, some days I'm a little on this end, some days I'm a little on this end. That's how they choose to express their in-betweenness. Instead of distancing themselves from the binary, they embrace it, and they ride it like a surfer. It's not my style of doing things, but I can certainly understand where they're coming from. The fact that Kaylee does not mean it's wrong. It means Kaylee doesn't understand. But she's also referencing a statement by a teachers union. We have no way to verify any of this, but even if it's true, it's not really wrong, despite how badly Callie is misrepresenting the position. If you call a child something other than what they are, it can do harm. Take, for example, a cis child. If you put a cis child in a class and tell that cis child they are not the gender they know themselves to be, and you refuse to use their pronouns, you call them by different pronouns, you have everyone else call them by a different name, etc., yeah, it's going to cause psychological harm. So to do the same thing to a trans person just because they're not a cis person is kind of evil, and maybe you shouldn't be teaching children.
You are damaging the child.
Can I borrow your phone? No, Evie, we have a test on this next week. Chill and stop calling me Evie. I go by Evan now.
Oh, so it's Eva now. So what are your preferred pronouns?
He, him.
So everybody, let's start call Evan by his new pronouns. Yes, Billy.
My preferred pronouns are actually hot and sexy. If you don't agree, you're canceled.
If you don't agree, you're canceled.
Billy, for real.
That's it. Billy for real. That's how the teacher deals with it. Again, it's dismissed as Billy being a jerk, but it's deliberately put in there as a nod to the Matt Walsh crowd. Oh, we acknowledge your existence. That's not what happened in this scenario, but you're real and you're valid, Matt Walsh fans. For fuck's sake. Now we're back with Dr. Grossman. Yay!
Anyone who does not accept your identity is unsupportive. It places a wedge between the child and their parents. From my experience, the parents in these situations are almost always loving and devoted parents who will do anything for their child, but they won't deny the truth.
Dr. Grossman has a very nice way of phrasing the opposite of truth. Lying to us, I suppose. She presents it as if there's this artificial us versus them being created. But if you live in a situation where your parent says they love you, says they support you, and they do take care of you, they provide a house for you to live in, and food for you to eat, and clothes for you to wear, and a heat to, not freeze to death, well, they're perfectly loving. Except they do this one little thing. It's creating this artificial us versus them situation, which ironically Grossman and the others are going to point at very soon, but they're setting the stage for it. But the thing of it is, it really is there, but it's on their end. All these parents have to do is to affirm that their child is the person that their child knows themselves to be. And that doesn't necessarily mean the lack of that makes a person a hostile parent. My parents, for example, have a great deal of difficulty with both my and my oldest's pronouns and names and things like that. They try, they just don't get it. Like for this holiday, my oldest got a sweatshirt that said, "Ask me about my pronouns," which is, an attempt at being supportive, but at the same time also a notebook that said it's just a girl thing, which right over their head. They're not trying to be hostile. They just don't understand. And I get how a lot of kids can see when you've explained something to your parents over and over and over, and they're just not getting it. At a certain point, they must be trying not to get it. But that's a teenager thing. That happens across the board with everything. Not to be dismissive, because this is a serious matter. It's just more nuanced than Dr. Grossman lays it out as. This us versus them, and it's an artificial us versus them. The fact that we're doing something wrong doesn't mean we're in the wrong. It's everyone else who's wrong who's pointing out that we're doing something wrong. How dare.
I'm worried about Evie. She seems so sad lately. So I figured I'd try to give her something nice for her birthday.
She's a teen, Mom. It's part of life.
You're not moody like that, right?
Also, she's getting confused going to that club,
What? What club?
So we're in the fictionalized narrative. The mom does not know about the secret club, but somehow the brother does. He's only just now mentioning it. And of course, his opinion is that she's getting all confused, even though he doesn't know about anything that's going on either. But okay, it's fine.
Now this club for...
I discovered through her iPad that the teachers at that school changed her name to a male name. I did not know what I was walking into when I called the school, but I read them the riot act. How dare you change my daughter's name? And there was...
So, a quick point on this. This school may be different. in my experience, the school doesn't change the child's name. The child changes the child's name, and the school respects it. It's a subtle distinction, but remember, we're dealing with propaganda, scripted propaganda, with a lot of money behind it. So even the subtle distinction, when things are misrepresented in a very slight way, it's still intentional, and it does still make a cumulative difference.
Response was, well, we need to be a safe space for her.
Okay, let's look at this little tag. This is going to tell us a lot. What does this say? Remember, Erin is presenting herself as a reasonable, rational person, and the whole rest of the world is insane. This is a business card size flyer, something. It says Advocates Protecting Children. And in the pink square, it says, let's think about it. If we should simply trust that doctors know what they're doing when they give gender dysphoric kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and sex reassignment surgeries, that must mean that doctors knew what they were doing when they performed frontal lobotomies on psychiatric patients, and the rest is blurred. It's bad rhetoric. It's a bad argument. It's a false equivalency. It's like saying trusting a doctor to do a knee surgery must mean that we should have trusted the doctors who brought out leeches to get the ghosts out of our blood. The two have nothing to do with each other, and there's also a large period of time with additional research that has happened in between. It's just deliberately misleading people, intentionally, emotionally manipulating them in order to lead them to a wrong conclusion. And not only is it kind of evil and definitely lying, but the fact that you have to resort to lies, Erin, shows that your position is morally bankrupt. If there were anything real to what you were saying, you would not have to lie, Erin. For fuck's sake. Okay, let's go on.
So I said, well, by extension, I'm unsafe, right? Because I call her by her female name. So does her father, so does her brother, and all the adults in her life call her by her female name. Are we all unsafe?
Yes. The fact that you call a person by the wrong name doesn't necessarily make a person unsafe. In Erin's case, she did not know about the other name because her child never told her. As it turns out, with good reason, because of how she reacted. But that in and of itself, failing to call the child by their new name, does not make you unsafe, especially, and in particular, if you don't know the child has chosen a new name. However, the way Erin reacted when she found out about the child's new name and gender and etc. is a very clear demonstration that Erin was in fact very much not safe. What Erin did to her child would be considered a war crime in other circumstances.
I learned that apparently I was unsafe because Child Protective Services did show up at my house along with the police.
Yeah. And remember, the version of what happened that we get from Erin is from Erin. We have no external corroboration. We have no testimony from the child or any other witnesses. The fact that we know the horrible things we do is because Erin presented them, and Erin probably has a pro-Erin bias. Here is a clip from an interview that Erin did.
Anybody who is in that line of indoctrination has their head on the chopping block.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with the podcast host. He says okay in this mild-mannered, reassuring tone, but look at his expression. She's just outright said she wants to murder some people. And it's the fact that she refers to it as indoctrination when her side is the one indoctrinating, her side is the one trying to program people, trying to brainwash people. She literally sent her own child to the gulags in order to try to indoctrinate that child into being someone other than who they actually are. But it's everyone else who needs to go on the chopping block. Oh my goodness.
That's new. I like his style.
It's not a guy. They're non-binary.
Okay, well, it sure looks like a guy to me.
Why are you so obsessed with labeling people?
What are you talking about? I don't understand.
You should really educate yourself. When you call someone a he and they're not, you could really hurt someone.
I'm not following.
Please. You are so not woke.
The scriptwriter's writing is showing through. The mother's deliberately not understanding. The teenagers being moody and broody and not communicating well. Remember, fictional characters. Their dialogue is controlled by the scriptwriters and the director. Some of the things being brought up are semi-close to how things actually are. Like, yeah, referring to a non-binary person as he could cause some damage under the right circumstances. But the way you're so not woke. Wow, the scriptwriter is showing through. They're definitely projecting really, really hard into this character.
Evie, sweetie, please.
No.
Just listen, please be careful with what you let yourself be influenced by, okay?
This isn't.
Be careful with what you let yourself be influenced by. It's the influences. The mom never does anything wrong. She's not deliberately misunderstanding. She's just, oh my goodness.
This isn't about that. This is about you mislabeling people.
Honey.
And you do it too much.
Hold on. Wait, where are you getting this from?
No, I need.
Not what are you talking about, not explain it to me because this is important. It's where are you getting this from? It must be coming from an outside source. You must have been coached or scripted or what have you. This couldn't be coming from your own mind or how you really feel. For fuck's sake.
I need you to leave now.
Evie!
No.
Evie!
No!
I think this is a phase she's going through.
No, I don't see it that way.
You can see that Evan clearly refers to himself as a boy. Right, Evan?
Right.
Yeah.
Just not happy in my current body.
Evelyn suffered from depression, okay? I think
So this is important. This is the school counselor again. Not, Evan's personal therapist. School counselor, the fictional school counselor who's been pushing Evan to go to the trans group and et cetera, et cetera. But also, the mother takes a deliberate step to deliberately dead name the child. Right in front of the child. What the fuck? This is supposed to come across to middle of the road people as if the poor mother's confused and is trying to work her way through this and do her best. But it also come across to the conservative viewers as she understands this is nonsense and she's trying to be nice for the benefit of her child, but will not bow to something she knows is not real, to this fiction being put on her child by the schools and all of that crap. It's once again, there's so freaking much wrong with this. But fundamentally, it is scripted. It is fiction. None of this is real. It's not even an approximation of what's real. It's the conservative fantasy of how a situation like this might play out.
that's what's causing all this confusion with her gender identity,
Do you realize how much harm you're doing to Evan? Disrespecting his wishes, refusing to affirm who he is?
Disrespecting? Wouldn't it be better to try to resolve the underlying cause of the depression? I mean, she's a child.
This is really frustrating because it's not a matter of better. If you have a transgender child and you are deliberately disrespecting them, if you are deliberately dead naming them and misgendering them and so forth, that can be the cause of depression, but also you can have depression separate from that. And resolving that depression, which again, this is all made extra messy by the fact we're talking about a school child, a teenager, when everyone is unsure of who they are and goes through unstable emotional states. It's literally confusing for everyone, and a huge number of people do experience some type of depression during that phase in their development. That does not mean they aren't trans. That does not mean they aren't cis. Once again, and this is the most important thing, trans people know they're trans in exactly the same way cis people know they're cis. Because it's not about cis or trans, it's about knowing who you are. The labels are shit that humans apply to it.
She has her whole life in front of her.
Most importantly, your child is clearly showing signs of being suicidal. Would you rather want a dead daughter or a living son?
Dramatic music.
Would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son? That question is asked over and over again in therapy sessions by therapists. And therapists are trained to say that.
So, I wanted to fact check that claim as well. So I wrote to friend of the show, Christy Powell, whom many of you may know as a actual sex therapist who frequently appears on various skeptic space programs to talk about this exact sort of thing. And so I asked Christy, I explained what Miss Garfield Yeager said, and asked Christy about it. And Christy said, honestly, just the idea that therapists are routinely trained in anything is pretty laughable. We're a highly diverse field with shockingly little oversight or central organization. I myself went to a laughably bad Christian university for my graduate work, and I can assure you, no one was trained on that idea, that every therapist says, would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter? Mostly, it's an overly cute line, even if its meaning has real value. All that said, the notion that therapists are pushing for or against trans acceptance as a block is pretty ridiculous. I appreciate the hell out of that response because while I knew that that line was bullshit, we know that line comes from Chloe Cole. It has been popularized by Chloe Cole. No one else ever says that until they've heard that line from Chloe Cole. But I do very much appreciate Christy's perspective that not only is the line bullshit, but therapists as a group aren't a group. There's no cohesiveness within that industry at all. So to say that they even accept a single thing, let alone are pushing a particular line, is just total freaking nonsense.
They told my parents, like, there's a very low rate of regret in adolescents who transition, and if I wasn't allowed to transition, if they didn't affirm me and my identity, that I would be at risk of suicide. They gave them the false premise of, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son?
Another dangerous thing I learned.
We see from the Trevor Project, we see from other statistical surveys that transgender teens are at a higher risk. But do bear in mind that higher risk doesn't mean they will do it, right? It's something around 42%, depending on which numbers you're looking at. But again, for baseline contrast, the lowest rate of self-harm ideation is in cisgender men, and that's at 25%. Our civilization is extremely toxic to everyone's mental health. It's worse for transgender children because they have so much more to deal with from family. Yeah, I mean, a cis child thinks their parents don't understand. Holy crap, that goes to a whole other level when you're a trans child. But that's a separate thing. Even an elevated percentage does not mean it is definitely going to happen, which is why no one says that.
Was that if you had gender dysphoria, your best option was transitioning, and basically you couldn't be happy, and you could even commit suicide if you didn't transition. So that definitely started to impact the way I thought about myself.
Okay, this is Kat Cattinson. There's some things you should know about Kat. Kat is a professional singer, a musician, but what we do know is that Kat had been living as a male since the age of 13 and did not begin to look into hormones until the age of 29. So it's not like Kat was being rushed through something that took place in middle school. 16 years. Most of her life, she lived as a male, and at the age of 29, decided to look into getting hormones.
And it made me feel, looking back, it made me feel even more hopeless, because I thought there was no way to accept myself. I had to get these painful surgeries and take hormones, etc.
Painful surgeries. Experiences differ. I know several trans people who've gone through top surgery. I only know a couple who've gone through bottom surgery. Some people experience lasting pain, others don't. There's complications. It just like any kind of surgery. You could get a painful knee surgery, or maybe you experience a great amount of relief after a knee surgery. It's really hard to say, but to call it painful like this, it's more rhetoric. It's part of the propaganda. It's painting this picture. The surgeries are always bad. They're always hurtful. They always cause pain.
So we went to a therapist, and that therapist right off the bat told us that my daughter had a 41% chance of committing suicide. And when I queried her about that study, she couldn't answer one question I had about the study because she hadn't read it.
Aaron Friday throws that out there. We don't know. We don't know if it's true. We don't know if Aaron's making it up. We don't know anything. It's Aaron's say-so. Maybe the therapist did quote a study. I don't know what study they're talking about. I know what the Trevor Project says. I can find other surveys around that have different numbers, but I don't know which specific study, if it even was a study. It could have been the Trevor Project, which is not strictly a study. It's a self-report survey. But whatever. We just don't know. But what we do have is Aaron throwing out there, the therapist didn't even read the study. So we can't trust the medical experts because they're clearly incompetent. My fictional version of a person that I'm telling you about was incompetent. Therefore, all medical professionals in reality must also be incompetent.
Can't really remember the first visit with the gender specialist. All I remember is that I was evaluated for gender dysphoria. There wasn't really exploration of any underlying issues. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with ADHD, but I believe that I actually have autism. And
oh, okay. Well, I mean, as long as Chloe believes that she has autism, that must be true. There is an epidemic of misdiagnosing and underdiagnosing children. For a while, every child was with any kind of behavioral difficulty was ADD and then ADHD. We got to give them lithium, or we got to give them Adderall, or whatever the case may be. There is something of a push to just diagnose a child with whatever the flavor disorder of the month is. And that is a problem because it causes people to distrust the medical practice and to not take seriously anybody who actually does have that condition, because they're like, oh yeah, I was misdiagnosed with that too. That doesn't mean it's not a real thing that some people actually do have. You can have other things and also be a trans person. Chloe says, why didn't they look into these other things? Why would they? Those have nothing to do with whether or not you are a trans person. Having them doesn't mean you're not trans. Not having them doesn't mean your transness is extra valid. It's not relevant at all. That's not what a gender specialist would be looking into.
And I didn't really get consultation for that until after I stopped transitioning when I was 17.
I asked my parents to take me to a gender therapist. He affirmed me immediately.
I asked my parents to take me to a gender therapist. He affirmed me immediately. Remember, this I asked my parents. This was at the age of 29 years old. And Kat had been living as a male for the last 16 years. So why wouldn't the doctor affirm Kat immediately? This I asked my parents is meant to paint the picture that we're talking about when Kat was a child. It was at the age of 29. And with 16 years of living as a trans person, most of Kat's life at that point, why in the world would any therapist not say, oh, well, are you sure?
He just sort of overlooked my eating disorder and my other mental health issues that I had.
Yeah, because that's not what gender therapists are for. You can't go to an eye doctor and say they didn't check on the bunions on your feet, because that's not their specialty, Kat.
I'm Walt Heyer. I operate a website called sexchangeregret.com.
Walt, yes, this is true. Walt does operate such a website. Here it is. I have pulled up already a picture of Walt in 1977 as he looked, in 1984 when he was a trans person, and today, well, as he looks in the video. But, well, let's let Walt tell Walt's story.
And we've helped over 1,000 people, and we continue to do that every day. I mean, I'm 82 years old. I'm still talking about the harm that was done to me 78 years ago. Well, it all started when I was a 4-year-old boy, and my grandmother started cross-dressing me. When my dad found out about me being cross-dressed, he was horrified. Later on, his adopted brother began to me.
We're going to tangent a little bit into something kind of personal. It was very important to me to get my story about when I knew I was trans on the record before we got to a video like this. Because there's this narrative out there that trans people are by and large just reacting to some type of trauma, often sex or gender related trauma. And that's why they're trans. It has something to do with unresolved trauma. When I was in elementary school, I was abused by another student. She happened to be a girl. It went on for a couple of years, and because I happened to appear male and had no way to tell anyone otherwise, because we did not have the language, we did not have the terminology, and we live in a relatively red part of the country where people wouldn't understand even if I did. There was this expectation that as the man, I should do something about it. I should be able to stop this girl. And the fact that I wasn't meant I liked it. The truth was, I didn't want to hurt her. That did not make it okay. That did not mean I wanted it. I was actually called into the principal's office with the girl and her parents, where the principal went on a very long tirade about how I was hurting her. When the county social workers who were present finally stopped the principal from screaming at me, an elementary school child, and asked the girl, she laughed at the fact that I'd been getting screamed at over this, and explained to the lady that she did what she did, and I tried to stop her, but I couldn't stop her. I tried to push her hands away. I tried to move her back to her seat. I tried to sit with other kids so she wouldn't be able to get to me on the school bus, things like that. But short of physically hurting her, I couldn't stop her, and she knew I wouldn't hurt her, so she kept doing it. Once she admitted, gleefully admitted, to the principal and the county worker that she was the one hurting me, the principal told me to get out of his office and consider myself lucky That's not the reason I'm trans, because I was trans before that. And it didn't change anything about me being trans. So when someone like Walt here and a few others are going to try to say that a person who has a traumatic experience, that's why they're trans, that's not true. It certainly doesn't help the totality of one's mental health, but it doesn't make you trans.
I got married, had children, and then I went to, a gender specialist. When he met with me and said, you need hormones and you need surgery to resolve this conflict that you have about your gender. Well, the truth was, it was never about gender. I learned this after I was 50 years old.
Good for you, Walt, that you got to the bottom of it and you realized that it wasn't actually about your gender. It was about your childhood trauma. That doesn't mean the therapist you talked to was in the wrong, because ostensibly, Walt told the specialist, this is how I feel, this is what's going on with me, this is what I think I need. Nobody can read a patient's mind. No therapist can tell what you're not telling them, or if what you're telling them is true. Perhaps the therapist wasn't good at their job, but perhaps they were. All we have is Walt's side of this, with 2020 hindsight, after he figured out things that he didn't know at the time he talked to the therapist.
After living the life of Laura Jensen, female transgender, it was always about what happened with a purple dress and being sexually abused. And no one was addressing this adverse childhood experience that caused that trauma.
I actually had some sexual trauma that was unaddressed. I was sexually assaulted in middle school. For a long time, I didn't realize how much this affected me and my body image.
I was abused by a little boy. He was like physically and sexually abusive. So I felt defenseless. And I think this idea that I'd rather be a boy because I felt like I could better protect myself if I was a male.
Many young people.
So like I said, in the foreshadowing, they're going to paint this picture. All these detransitioners also have trauma. The trauma was why they thought they were trans. Maybe that's true for them. But the fact that they weren't actually trans doesn't mean no one is.
People who've been subjected to sexual abuse actually want to remove their genitalia because they never want to be sexually abused again.
That's not the same thing as being trans either. And I don't think that's terribly common. There may be some people who feel that way, but that's not super relevant to what we're talking about or this entire video. But I mean, thanks for that, Walt.
Not gender dysphoria. The fact of the matter is there's many other people who go to therapy and find out that they can treat these disorders and they don't have to live this way.
That's true to an extent. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I myself have been to therapy and I found it very, very helpful. Many of us probably have a lot of baggage we don't even realize we're carrying. Now, I knew I needed help when I went to therapy, and it did help with that, and it also helped with things I didn't even know were problems. So it's very helpful, and I suggest everybody should at least try it, just because you may not know consciously about the things you're carrying around. But the fact that my mental health is better doesn't mean I'm no longer a trans person, because they're not related.
So I've heard your mother, she has concerns, right? But how are you feeling now?
I just want to be happy.
So do you think you'll be happy as a boy?
I don't know.
I have to point out, we see the black bars, we see the characters, we're in fiction land again. And once again, we only have Mrs. Martinez's saying what happened to Andrew, and we're interlacing these narratives from these other people. So when the character of Evan expresses confusion about, I don't know if I'll be happier as a boy, it's a layer of fiction upon fiction upon fiction. We don't know if the real Andrew felt that way. Maybe he did, but we don't know. We're dealing with fiction. So it's not for sure. In fact, it's very unlikely that Andrew did ever say anything of the sort.
It might be underlying issues connected to trauma.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Has Evelyn had any diagnosis before?
Yeah. Honey, you just said you're not sure if you be happy as a boy. You can understand my concern here, right?
Well, I'm not happy as a girl.
Okay, well, let's...
And we're painting the false picture again. I'm not happy as a girl, therefore I have to be a boy. It's a false dichotomy, and it's a fictional narrative.
Let's talk to Mr. Scott, and let's try to figure it out, all right?
Mom, why are you controlling me like this?
Evelyn, I think it's Evelyn.
The teen overreacts, classic, relatable. Mom rolls the eyes and is at a loss, no idea what to do. What am I going to do with my struggling child? But it's fiction. It's close enough to reality that people just kind of accept it because there's elements of relatability within it. But these specific events are made up.
Gender affirming care furthermore would say that if in a few years this child begins to feel very nervous about puberty, then the next step should be to block puberty.
The Dutch.
That's not quite true. It's in the ballpark. Like many of Dr. Grossman's mistruths, there's elements of truth filtered in, but it's not strictly true. We don't block puberty in trans kids because they're nervous about puberty, but because there's that element of needing to go through the wrong puberty if you don't, and that causes problems. You can, of course, transition in adulthood. Many trans people have, but why, when you have the ability to give a trans person the correct puberty, would you not do that? And again, this goes to this idea that there's so much confusion about personal identity during the middle school years that a kid could be confused and could go down the wrong path and cause irreparable damage to their body. Well, of course it's not at that stage, because they can just go off the puberty blockers and resume normal puberty. Exactly the same way a person experiencing precocious puberty can go off the puberty blockers and have a normal puberty. That's the actual point. It's to prevent there being bigger problems later on if the child persists. And it also speaks to another underlying problem, that a lot of kids are only exposed to these ideas around middle school age. If we talked about them in elementary school, then by the time people reach middle school, they already have a handle on these concepts and understand better who they are. And we're going to take a slight detour to meet one such person. This is Corey. As you can see, Corey is 14 years old. Now, I can't actually play this video because it's from ABC News. We will get copyright struck to all hell if we do. But as you can see, Corey is a 14-year-old girl recording in a girl's bathroom. And the cards talk about the bullying that she went through as she came out as a trans person prior to middle school. She had to be removed from school for a couple of years because of the bullying, not because she was trans. But now she's in a school where she's accepted. She can play on the girls' sports teams. because she is a girl. This is from 2016, as you can see. I decided to check on Corey, and as it turns out, Corey is not only trans, and still trans, but she has a parent who's trans as well. There's a lot in this story. This is from Upworthy.com, and you can Google it. Her name is Corey Mason. It's, no doxing. This is Corey's public information. She's always known, and now her dad Eric, because of Corey's transition, has had the courage to transition as well. And so it's not a social media contagion. It's one family member did what was right for them, and it caused the older generation family member to finally be their true selves. It's really kind of heartwarming in that respect. Corey never changed her mind, never backed down, and her story is out there. She's covered it for years. She has her own YouTube channel, her own Instagram. It's kind of sweet, in my humble opinion.
Really pioneered this and had 12 years old, I believe, as the earliest age. But with the Endocrine Society, WPATH, they've lowered this to 8 or 9 years old.
Okay, what the heck is WPATH? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're like me and you're like, I've heard it. What is it? It is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And it was founded in 1979. Not a new thing. Not something that only happened in 2008 or whatever gender criticals and their ilk like to say. Yeah, it's a professional medical organization worldwide that sets standards and best practices for working with transgender people. I've included a link to them if you want to learn more, if you want to donate, if you want to whatever. It's there for you in the links with all the other resources.
What are you talking about? I'm starting my transitioning hormones tomorrow, which is like really exciting.
But are you sure that's safe though? I mean, I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah. I've talked to my doctor. He said it's just like a pause button if I want to change later on, which I know I won't.
But isn't that like the same drugs they give to pedos to like chemically castrate them or something?
Yeah, I heard that too, actually.
That's extremely transphobic and super hurtful.
The rhetoric gets a little off the chain in this scene. It's a lot of conservatives like to say, oh, that's the same chemical they give to pedos. Sometimes, yes, in much higher doses. You can take just about anything in a ridiculously high dose, and it becomes very toxic. If you try to inject, say, 4 gallons of water, you're probably going to die. Again, on the other side of the coin, it's also used to treat people for precocious puberty. And they experience no ill effects other than not having puberty too early. How you use a medicine is kind of important. It's just rhetoric to say it's also used for this. Do you know what else Viagra was originally used for? Do you know what else Benadryl was originally used for? They still have those properties. They still do the things that they were designed to do. We just found other uses that are a little more marketable. But to have the Caden character come out and instead of addressing the reality of, that's a valid concern. Let's talk about that. Let's explore that. I'll educate you, whatever. To just blow up and say, that's extremely transphobic, when the viewer knows it's factually true. It's only part of the truth. It's a misleading fragment of the truth, but it itself is not false. It paints this picture that trans people and trans advocates don't want to engage with reality. They just, anything against me is transphobic. And that's fucking horrible. But again, we see those black bars. This is fiction.
Why would you say that? That's the very attitude that we are trying to fight. What, are you guys, are you transphobes or what?
No, we're not.
Sounds like it.
We're just curious. But good luck with that.
Thanks.
Yes, anyone who dares to question, we're just going to call them transphobes. End of discussion. Totally realistic.
Just like my mom.
Well, you know Joshua from club? He says our closest family are often our worst enemies.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think it's true.
First of all,
Did you catch that last bit of dialogue? Justin from Club. He says, our closest family are often our worst enemies, and I think it's true. Again, fucking fiction. But we gotta throw it out there, because the whole thing with the trans extremists, anyone who's not with us is against us.
all puberty blockers, it's a lie that it's reversible. The puberty blockers really put a hold on development.
Have we done Catherine Welch yet? Right, she works with an organization, human trafficking. She is part of a group called Relentless. She's come into conservative awareness because of QAnon, which is weird, but also, yeah, it's pretty ishy. That movie that the QAnon people produced, where they went and literally human trafficked people under the guise of we have to protect the children, she weighed in on that movie saying, oh, it's a wonderful thing because I'm so against human trafficking that we should be human trafficking. It's really, really, really problematic. But her whole deal is that she's against trafficking, human slavery, all these sorts of things, and somehow got tied up in the anti-trans movement on the grounds that transgender people are more likely to be trafficked. Somehow. I've seen no statistics on that. It's just part of her thing.
The puberty blockers really put a hold on development.
A person may have been blocked for puberty for 2 years while the rest of their peers are developing along a certain pathway. They've missed out on events and connections that they cannot reform.
So that's partially true. A person who is a late bloomer, as they used to say, who started puberty late, similarly misses out on those events, but not being in the early stages of puberty does not mean that a person doesn't get invited to birthday parties or can't have friends. It's just your physical development and your social development are not connected. And also, there's a bit of confusion, like the Caden character, who's something like 16, maybe 17, as depicted in the fictional part of the film here, is starting puberty blockers, but they're kind of conflating it with cross-sex hormones, which is not the same thing, and it's a big ol' freaking mess.
I have this friend who everybody thought, oh, they click and they were best friends, but what this friend was doing, in quote, is trying to convince Jaylee that to go into transition.
Ms. Martinez is telling this story from after the fact. The friend being supportive of who Andrew was doesn't mean the friend was trying to force Andrew to transition, like Andrew was being tricked into becoming a trans person. That's almost certainly bias added on by the mom after the fact. But we have no way to know. We can't tell. There's no record. There's no other side of the story. But instead of being honest about that fact, we're going to double down and show you a fictionalized version of that with extra rhetoric thrown in.
Yay! Check out Evan in all black.
Monochrome. I'm about it. I'm so excited for you guys. I don't want you to have to go through the pain of puberty and the wrong gender. It's just not okay.
Yeah, we can't wait, right? Because
That touches on something that's worth mentioning. It's not super relevant to the tale they're spinning here, but they do talk a lot about regret. And you can't otherwise without all these detransitioners in the film. People who waited, who had to wait, either because the options weren't available to them, or they just didn't have access for health insurance reasons, or their parents wouldn't allow it, or whatever the case may be, and ended up transitioning later in life, often regret not doing it sooner. That's an important element of regret too. It's not just the detransitioners saying, oh, there's a chance a person might regret it. And that is a valid thing. There is a chance a person could regret it. The regret rate for transitioning is lower than the regret rate for knee surgery, for open heart surgery, something you need to actually live, or for taking on student loans. It's a pretty damn low regret rate. But there is a regret rate. Some people do regret it. But you have to balance that with the fact that there are a number of people, a huge number of people, who not only don't regret their transition, but have regrets they weren't able to transition earlier. Because for every detransitioner who says, I lost 2 years of my life, which they didn't. They got to live their life. They just did it as a trans person. But they lost 2 years of their life, or whatever the case may be. There's 1,000 trans people who say, I had to live X number of years of my life as a person who was not me. And I wish I had that time back too.
If we do, we're gonna have to pay for it ourselves. Yep. My mom would never allow it.
Which is not okay.
So this is touching on a California thing. And it's partly true. There's this idea that kids, particularly in California, are speed run through the transition process because California will pay for it. And that's not really true. Here's the Google search I did on it. Does California pay for gender reassignment surgery? Kind of. California law requires health insurance plans to cover medically necessary gender-affirming care, including treatments. This also applies to California's version of Medicaid called Medi-Cal, which means if you qualify for Medicaid in California, but it's not like there's a law in California saying if you're a kid, California will pay. So there's a grain of truth to it, but it's mostly false.
That's abuse. No one can force you to live there, and you're welcome to stay here.
So Caden's mom was saying Evan's mom can't force Evan to not transition. That is abuse. But that's not true because Evan is a minor. Evan's mom absolutely could stop Evan until Evan reaches the age of majority or is emancipated. But whatever. We're just going to hand wave that, say it's abuse, and move along.
We love you.
Joining these communities, they're very accepting of them. And then it also puts an us versus them mentality. It's separating kids from their parents. It's telling.
There's that us versus them thing again. Now, it's important to note there is actually an us versus them thing between kids and parents. That's what teenagerhood is. It's the separation of the child from the parent as a distinct individual. This happens with cis kids as well as trans kids. It's natural. But to conflate that with this, the transgender cult is putting an us versus them in the thing and makes the parents the enemy, that's the propaganda. That's the rhetoric and the storytelling going on here.
Especially if a parent isn't affirming their gender, well, now they have an enemy in their parent, but then they can go to their teachers and they.
Once again, a parent not affirming a gender doesn't make the parent an enemy. They're not supportive. They're not helpful, but that doesn't automatically make them an enemy. Now, there's a fine line between not being supportive and being abusive. You can be a supportive family member to a person in most other ways and not support a certain thing. And that's a lack in a way you could be supportive, but that doesn't make you bad. That's the opposite of deliberately undercutting a person at every turn and saying, oh, you could never be a writer, or you'll never amount to anything. It's arguable whether that crosses the line into abuse, but it's a whole different ballgame than just not being supportive. So to try to conflate these two things, it's super dishonest of Callie here, but of course it fits perfectly into the rhetoric.
can go to their classmates and their peers to find their community and get really extreme in their gender ideology, gender identities.
Evelyn.
Imagine people getting really extreme in their gender identities. What's the analog for cis people here? What are we even talking about here? Once again, trans people are trans in the same way cis people are cis. If cis people were being harassed constantly about being cis, then maybe there would be a cisgender support club for support because they're being harassed constantly, not because you need to have a cult to reinforce the idea you're actually cis. Holy fuck.
Lynn. Hey, sweetie, please come sit down for a minute. Why do you feel like there's something wrong with you?
I'm a boy.
Look, I know you've been going through a hard time, all right? I understand it's confusing, but a boy, I'm
not confused. I know who I am, and I want to be who I am, and I want you to love me for that.
Honey, I love you.
You love the girl that you gave birth to.
God gave you this amazing body, and you want to change it.
I'm your son.
Sweetie, you're confused. It's crazy.
No.
Evelyn.
No.
Get back here.
Evan clearly says, I am a boy. I want you to accept me as I am. And the mother flat out refuses. Says, you're confused, and finishes off the conversation with, that's crazy. I'm not sure what the writers were going for here, but I think they let a little too much truth slip through.
They even took off the license plate from their car. So there is no way that I was gonna figure out who and tell the police this is the car who picked up my daughter.
Yeah, big emotional music. Evan gets into a car and is gone. And Ms. Martinez explains that because of that fight, which again, we only have her side of, Andrew, the real Andrew, ran away. Yeah, that happens. As we heard from Aaron Friday's story. Her child ran away when she refused to accept who the child was and tried to force her to be otherwise. Cis teens run away when they feel they're misunderstood, or they have no place there, or they're not accepted. Of course, it's a risk for trans teens too. Again, statistics are super, super hard to find, accurate ones, representative ones. But yeah, trans teens run away a lot.
That was the last time that I spent with my daughter.
So, I'm really, really confused. She's not gonna live here anymore?
The state has decided that Evan should stay at a group home for now, for his safety.
I was allowed to see my daughter once a week, 1 hour, and we couldn't be alone. I couldn't ask her to come back home. I couldn't talk about God with her or pray.
You need to stop trying to convert him, or you'll lose your weekly hour completely.
So I can't ask her to come back home. I can't talk about memories from when she was a girl. I can't pray with her. What am I allowed to do?
Ma'am, you need to lower your voice.
Again, we're in the fictional part. And even so, the character still gets super hyperbolic. I can't do these 3 things that you've expressly said I can't do. Well, then clearly I can't do anything. But it's the teenagers who are overreacting. And of course, the cold state representative character. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice.
Mom is so worried about you. She's being accused of child abuse.
Yeah, well, it is abusive to not accept who someone is.
Hold that. Again, we're in fictional land. This is Evan. It can be. abusive to not accept who someone is, but that's not really what we're actually talking about. This is the writers rephrasing what's happening to make it seem a lot more less serious than it actually is. When you try to force a person to be someone they are not, and you try to use the tools at your disposal to manipulate them and coerce them, that is abuse. There's a whole range. Some behaviors fall into the abusive end. Others do not. But doing some abuse and not others doesn't mean you're not abusing a person. And if you go full on extreme all the way to the end of the abuse spectrum, it's not just dead naming. It's not just disrespecting pronouns, though those can be microaggression style signs of abusive behavior. They're not definite indicators of abuse in the way it's normally meant. They're not a good sign either. They're not exactly a green flag. And all these conservative groups that are saying, oh, you're just acknowledging biological reality, they're just reaffirming to each other that the bullshit is fine, exactly the same way that a couple of decades ago, people talked about spousal abuse. Oh, there's nothing wrong with beating your wife. She probably deserved it. No, you're a good person for doing that, and to hell with all these liberals who think that's wrong. It's exactly the same kind of justification for exactly the same reason. People don't want to accept that they have done horrible things and need to feel bad about it. But yes, let's just fictionalize it away and be like, oh, well, the character here is just taking it way too seriously.
We miss you so much, Abby. Okay? And I want you to come home.
I miss you too.
Leave him alone. He's going through enough to have to deal with you. He needs support right now.
Yeah, but you need to stop manipulating my sister.
What are you doing? Are you okay? What is this?
Abby, I'm beating me.
Mr. Peters, I just...
So yeah, that's a problematic scene for a couple of different reasons. The way it's written is not great at all, but even with the deliberate attempt to make it appear the light of the hero on the brother as much as possible, it still shows that he crossed a line. He got physical with another person in a way that was absolutely not warranted. And the scriptwriter still took the opportunity to misgender the character. For fuck's sake.
I just received a letter in my... Yes. No, I never abused her. I've told the child services, I've told the police, and I'm telling you.
And this is a super empathetic character. We're supposed to empathize. This is a poor mother who's at her wit's end. She doesn't understand what's going on. The system has gotten out of control. She's never abused anyone. But of course, that's exactly what an abusive person says, isn't it? Oh, I told the police I didn't abuse anyone. Just like that decades ago abusive spouse told the police, oh, I didn't abuse my wife. I just gave her the beating she deserved. You see how that works? Because this is entirely from her perspective. She's the hero. She's the good guy. She never did anything wrong. It must be the state's completely out of control and is just accusing her of abuse spuriously. Which is pretty fucked up to throw in there, because if we did want to paint this person as an absolute angel who never did anything wrong, then why even include the abuse charges anyway? Because we've already fictionalized the story, so why include those?
And all of a sudden I get a letter in the mail saying I lost custody, so now what am I supposed to do? No, this cannot be happening. No one's listening to me. It's like I'm talking to the freaking wall.
Yes, no one's listening to you. That's it. It's all about you. What you say goes. It never, ever crosses this character's mind, either the fictional one or the real person that the character is based on, that everyone is telling her the same thing, and she is being the wall. She's the one that everyone is talking to and is just not absorbing it. She's rejecting all the information from every possible source. And she's making it all about her. This is what I want.
And I learned going to court. Every time I was there, they came to me and asked me, you know, it's time. If you don't sign this paper for her to get the treatment, she's gonna take her life away and it's gonna be on you. LGBT was there, coaching her.
Yes, the LGBT, the well-known non-governmental organization of the LGBT. They were there and they were coaching her. That's totally a thing that happens. It couldn't possibly be that her other friends who are LGBT people were there supporting her. No. They were shills. They were government professionals sent to coach her. Yes, that's totally believable.
Telling her that this was the right age to do it because the state of California will pay for all the transition surgeries, medication, the hormones, everything.
Once again, that's very, very misleading. That's not actually the state of things in California, as best I can determine. And it's definitely not the state of things in other states. The reason it's the best age is because this person in question has not completed puberty yet. It's like the old saying, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. But the second best time is to do it today. The longer you wait, the harder transition becomes. It doesn't make it impossible. But if you're going to transition, if you are sure, if it's a thing you definitely want to do, and once again, you don't have to go through any medical procedures. It's not a requirement. You don't have to clear a bar. You don't have to get through a gate to be a trans person. Those things are there for you. You don't have to prove you're trans by going through surgery. It's for you if you want and need it. Not because you have to do it. But if you are going to do it, the younger you do it, the better your results will be.
They've shown that majority of the kids who start with puberty blockers will continue on to what they call cross-sex hormones or opposite-sex hormones that are even more difficult to reverse.
That's not actually what they call that. You can call them that, but that's a really outdated term. We tend to call it HRT these days, or hormone replacement therapy.
Like the first time I injected, afterwards I actually felt like really proud of myself. Of course, I'm getting affirmed by my community online, and friends in real life who are trans are like, yeah, great job.
I can imagine. Once again, Kat lived as a man for most of her life by the time she got around to looking into hormones. So yeah, friends who knew her as a trans man would be like, go, you do the thing. This is clearly something that's been very important to you for a very long time, and we're super proud of you for taking that step. Why would a friend not do that?
First couple months, I was pretty excited about what I was doing and the changes I was seeing.
I mean, throughout my transition, I was getting probably the most support I ever had in my life up until that point.
Evan just started his hormone treatment. So let's give him all our love, okay, guys?
Yes,
well done.
Starting on hormone blockers is not the same as starting what Michael would call cross-sex hormones. First, if you're in a phase where puberty blocking even means anything, you do that for a while. Then you start on your HRT. And the film, I don't know if the scriptwriters just didn't know, or it was a director decision, or what the deal is, but they're not the same thing.
A month after she started, the treatment, My daughter was in pain. She used to cry. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't concentrate after, taking these hormones.
I don't know how Ms. Martinez would know this. If her story is to be believed, then Andrew was living in a group home. She'd lost custody. She'd been accused of child abuse. She was only allowed to see Andrew for an hour a week. Maybe that's what they talked about, but I don't think so. And we have no way to check. It's pretty sus. This, as with many of these things, we can't say for sure it definitely didn't happen, but it sounds a lot like the kind of thing that a person making shit up would make up. That said, there are people who do experience pain when going through hormone therapy. For some people, it's worth it. For others, it isn't. For many people, there isn't pain. I can't really speak to it from personal experience because I have never had access to HRT, either as a person experiencing puberty or as an adult. I'm hoping to fix that someday, but for the time being, I have no personal experience to draw upon. But the fact that some people experience pain does not mean it is wrong for them or anyone else.
And this chemical was trying to force her little bones to change, to her body.
They put a small amount of estrogen with a large amount of blocking of testosterone to block my testosterone.
David Bacon, as best I can tell, he actually is just a detransitioner.
Testosterone from being developed. And then I felt down, I felt tired, I felt exhausted, my mom said I looked like a pale ghost. During that time, about 2 years in, I actually ended up developing a polyp in my colon. I asked them what was the cause of it, and they said, well, you have a high estrogen level in your system, and you're a man, technically. A small amount of estrogen with a large amount of blocking of testosterone.
That is extremely unlikely. Not only that a doctor would say that in that way, of course, I'm sure David would say he's paraphrasing, but also if a person who is stereotypically a male happens to have a system with a high level of estrogen in it, for a doctor to say, well, you have too much estrogen, that's almost certainly not going to be the case. Because first of all, the studies don't have an answer on that. It's not, oh, estrogen is definitely causing that. But also, the doctor wouldn't make that connection because we don't have the data, and what data we have suggests that that's not the case. So why would a doctor jump to that conclusion? It makes as much sense as a doctor saying, oh, well, you've got a brain tumor. I see you like to eat onions, therefore the onions must be the cause of your brain tumor. There's no connection there.
I wanted my breasts gone. And so my gender specialist had me referred to a surgeon who operates on minors.
Will he be in pain when he wakes up?
No pain whatsoever. And, he'll be back to normal very, very soon and more satisfied than ever.
So are there any risks?
No risks.
Yes. Surgeons always will tell you there are no risks to any surgery. No surgery has any risks. Or lots of surgeries have no risks. I'm sure, yes, that's absolutely legit, for sure. Surgeons who specialize on minors, like Chloe said, there's a reason they exist. And it's not because of trans people. It's because there are people under the age of majority who get chest surgeries. Often they get implants. The point is that gender-affirming care isn't just for trans people. There's another creator whose channel goes by TMM who had gender-affirming care as a teenager, but it further confirmed his cisgender identity, so that's okay.
These kids are getting put on puberty blockers like after the first visit, or they're just going straight to hormones, or they're just getting pushed through this pipeline of surgery.
I
They're being put on puberty blockers or hormones or pushed through this pipeline of surgery, which throughout this whole thing, they're building the case for it, but they're just asserting it. They're not demonstrating it. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence to the contrary that such a thing exists. What pipeline? What are we talking about? The best statistics that I've been able to find, again, linked below, 2021 survey, approximately 42,000 children and teenagers in the United States were diagnosed with gender dysphoria. According to current statistics, 9,000 transgender surgeries are performed each year in the United States. 9,000 out of 370 million people. 9,000 surgeries. And that includes top surgery. What pipeline?
I told myself I wanted to wait 5 years for breast implants, 10 years for the bottom surgery. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because not even a year into hormones, one medical professional had signed me off for surgery for both breast implants and bottom surgery when I had only asked for breast implants.
There's an important bit in there. Abel just said he intended to wait 5 years before getting breast implants. And then after 1 year, he got his letter for both breast implants and bottom surgery, but he'd only asked for breast implants. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but he contradicted himself. He said he intended to wait 5 years, but then after 1 year, asked for breast implants. That's not on the surgeon then. That's not on his gender specialist then. He asked for a thing and then was given that thing, even though he intended to wait 5 years. Also, it's worth noting, the last time we saw Abel in another documentary, he talked about how it wasn't the surgeon or the gender specialist. It was his insurance company who proactively approved him for bottom surgery, which makes sense. Because if you're asking your insurance company for one kind of gender-affirming surgery, which you can validate because you've been on hormones and you have all these specialists lined up who are, on board with the whole program, the odds are very, very high that you're going to want bottom surgery at some point. Maybe it's made up, but even if it's not, it tracks with reality. It shouldn't really be a shock.
Out of the team of 5 that were in there, one of them stayed behind and told me the actual harmful effects and the results of failure rates of the bottom surgery and the top surgery of being 68 to 72% failure rate, and you're not going to have any feeling down there. It's going to be gone. There's no place to replace it. It isn't reversible.
So what David just said there, failure rates, and I'm going to scroll back a second so we can hear those again.
Failure rates of the bottom surgery and the top surgery of being 68 to 72% failure rate, and you're not
68 to 72% failure rate. I don't know where he got that information. Maybe someone did give it to him. Maybe he's misremembering it. I can't find anything that's remotely close to that. Not even remotely close. What do you mean by failure rates? What are we talking about here? Like the breast implants don't take? Like what is a failure condition in this circumstance? The best I can find is that as many as 8% require additional post-surgery services, which includes things like the stitches get infections. But does that mean the surgery failed? So I'm not sure what he means, but no, that's just not true at all.
Definitely a money trail towards having these transgender patients as lifelong medical patients.
Now we start to really get into the conspiracy. Why is this happening when the failure rate is so high and so many people regret it and nobody's happy, yada, yada, yada. Well, why is it happening? Oh, there's a money trail. Oh, I see. Well, let's see where that goes.
What we're seeing with the medical companies, the medical device, and the pharmaceutical companies, when they can fund the activists and the NGOs to stir up a lot of passion.
The medical companies and the pharmacies, they're They're stirring up the activists. They're funding the organizations. Okay. Okay.
Hey, we need this. We're suffering. We have gender dysphoria. We're going to commit suicide if we don't transition.
That's a conservative talking point. We see it. It really annoys me because it's when they take something that's true, misrepresent it, and then parrot it in order to make it seem like absurdity. And it's really, really bad. There aren't trans people out here running around saying, if you don't let us transition, we're going to unalive ourselves. There are trans people who unalive themselves because they're not allowed to live as who they are. It's not the same thing at all. It's not like a cis person saying, if you don't let me live as a cis person, I'm going to unalive myself. It's if you take a cis person and make them live as someone other than who they are, there will naturally be a higher chance of them unaliving themselves because they're fucking miserable.
There's a demand then for it. And then the companies, the medical schools, the hospitals, they say, oh, well, look, all this demand, we have to have some emergency use authorization. We have to start doing research. We have to start doing this because it is a mental health crisis among our youth.
No, you're mixing things together. It's not a mental... Being trans is not a mental health problem. You can have mental health problems in addition to being trans. You can have mental health problems as a result of being trans and living in a society where people want to, I don't know, eradicate you.
It is all or nothing. Transgenderism must be eradicated.
That's a thing a person said on a stage in front of thousands of people to much applause. It increases mental anxiety in a lot of different ways. That's not because of being trans, though.
I noticed in the activist communities that I was in that anybody acknowledging biological reality was being
Biological reality, she says.
censored. And this was
Censored, she says. Who the fuck has censored J.K. Rowling? Who the fuck has silenced that woman? Once again, we're doing that thing that conservatives love to do. We're conflating holding people accountable for saying shitty things with canceling them or censoring them.
happening more and more.
The woman who is likely the world's best-known children's author is defending herself against growing accusations of transphobia.
They protested his classes, called him a Nazi, and labelled him transphobic.
Transphobic piece of shit! Transphobic piece of shit!
In fairness, Jordan Peterson is a transphobic piece of shit, but okay.
Dave Chappelle speaks out, and he's not backing down.
Even though the media frames this that it's me versus that community, this has nothing to do with them. It's about corporate interests and what I can say and what I cannot say.
Dave Chappelle is an interesting case because he makes this apologetic. It's between me and the corporate interest trying to censor me. No, Dave. You can't say it's not about them. It's not about the community. You chose to talk about trans people. You picked that topic. You decided to punch down. No corporation made you do that. No corporation stopped you from doing that. You chose to do it. So you can't say it's not about them when you picked the topic, you transphobic piece of shit.
This was very, very concerning. And so I started to look at why was this added to the LGBT, the T.
Oh, why was the T added? Well, let's spill the tea on the T, shall we? I have heard people, legitimate, honestly curious people, ask that. LGB are about sexuality, T is about gender. Why is that even there? Well, here's the thing. If you're a cis man attracted to a man, you are gay. But if you are a trans woman attracted to a man, then you're heterosexual. So your gender is half of what determines your sexuality in terms of the LG and B. It's kind of important. Half of it is what you're attracted to, half of it is who you are.
Where did it come from? And if you're going to look for anything in this country, you're going to follow the money.
I'm so glad she said that, because once again, she's a conspiracy nut, and she's going to try to paint some money trails for us. But I took the opportunity to reveal a little bit more truth than she might like to have in this documentary. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Because it will always tell you the truth. Who's funding these LGB organizations? And so what I found was a whole lot of very, very powerful, moneyed people.
Let's apply the same question to this sort of thing. Who's funding these organizations? Whose money is behind productions like this one?
In the highest echelons of finance, pharma, and technology. One of the first people I found was Jennifer Pritzker.
Jennifer Pritzker! Here's a Forbes article. Jennifer Pritzker, CEO, Taiwanese Enterprises. Net worth, real-time net worth, $2.1 billion. She is very, very rich. She is also the world's first openly transgender billionaire. She is a retired Army lieutenant colonel and also a transgender woman who came out in 2013. Why do you suppose a transgender billionaire might be using some of her money to, I don't know, make things suck less for transgender people? Personally, I'm at a loss. I can't even imagine why that could possibly be.
The wealthiest families in America, the Pritzker family, who were massively invested in the techno-medical complex.
Massively invested in the techno-medical complex. Okay, let's switch back here. Jennifer inherited her stakes in the family's Hyatt hotel chains, as well as industrial firms run by her late father and his brothers. And she also spent some of her money on military museums, a library, collections of books and military artifacts, things like that. Military, history, transgender stuff. This clearly is big pharma somehow.
The most probably important LGBT organization was Arcus Foundation. They were driving this gender identity ideology through all of our institutions with their money.
Arcus Foundation, driving all this stuff with all their money. My goodness, that sounds scary. That sounds... Oh wait, the Arcus Foundation's annual revenue is $33.68 million. And that's also not the only thing they do. Let's open their page, shall we? Let's have a look. Who is the Arcus Foundation? What's this? That looks like a primate. Huh. Ape conservation funding. Retired lab chimpanzees. And also LGBT stuff. Huh. Their $33 million a year goes to support apes, some of whom happen to be humans. $33 million. Let's say a third of it goes to LGBTQ organizations, fundraising, etc. I'm just not seeing it. If you had $11 million, could you fund anything on a national scale? I don't get it. I don't see what she's getting at. And according to her, this is the biggest organization behind all of this. They have the most money devoted to this purpose out of any organization.
And they created this whole political apparatus through these organizations by selling people basically on this being a human right as part of the LGB. They actually only became LGBT from like 2004 to 2006, and they all...
Hold your horses there. So, pinning down when the T got added. Letters have been pinned on from time to time as the general movement has become more accepting. Many people will remember when the Q got added, and there was all the controversy, and then adding the I and the A and the plus, and oh, when is it going to stop? It's so crazy, it's so crazy. Well, it is hard to pin down, because there's no historical record of it. The best information I've been able to say is that the term LGBT has been in use since the late 80s. And that's as close as we can get, which is rather a bit before 2006, but okay.
All shifted, they all started to add the T. When you look at the powerful people behind this, the major corporations, major banks, international law firms, all
like the Arcus Foundation with their $33 million, and an actual billionaire who is also actually an actual trans person.
our big technology companies, governments, politicians, at the highest echelons of Western societies. Why are they all doing this?
To parents of transgender children, affirming your child's identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy.
Why could they possibly all be doing this? Well, they must be getting financial kickbacks or something, right? Why would Joe Biden make a speech to tell people, you know, maybe love your children? Maybe stop hating children because they're not who you expected them to be? I don't know. It puts me in mind of the controversy about spanking kids from years ago. And people would say things like, I don't know, maybe stop beating your children and making them feel unloved. And other people would be like, oh, well, there must be money behind this. Who's paying you? Conspiracy theory. Tin hat. Hooray.
They never talk about how much harm is being caused and that it's causing 19 times more likely for you to commit suicide.
Okay, that's a claim. I don't know where he got that 19 times more likely to unalive yourself. What I can say is that we do have some data on people who are willing to self-identify. And it's linked in the description, nih.gov. Amsterdam Cohort Gender Dysphoria Study, 1972 through 2017. It's the longest study I could find over the longest period of time with the most people. It seems the most relevant. This is a clinic where they had, over that period of time, 8,263 referrals to the clinic since 1972. Out of the 5,107 trans women and 3,156 trans men, I'll just show the tab, what the hell, out of all of them, across all that time, they had 41 trans women and 8 trans men unalive themselves. That is less than 1%. Conversely, the United States national average has the rate of the population as a total unaliving themselves at roughly 1.5%. That's 19. That is not 19 times more likely a trans person who has successfully transitioned is considerably less likely than the general public to unalive themselves. Saying you're even more likely is completely unfounded.
Like, this is the most important question, really. Why are they all doing this simultaneously for a fraction of the population? Like,
why are people like Jennifer and all these other people and all these government organizations, the conservative political action committees, various foundations, politicians, why are they all simultaneously so very opposed to a group who make up a tiny fraction of the population? Why is this an issue all of a sudden? Maybe it's because awareness is spreading and they've only just realized that trans people exist. But it's not like we're new. There were gender clinics in the 1960s in the US, in the early 20th century in Germany, and as far back as history goes, there have been trans people. So why is it an issue for the conservatives now?
not even 1% of the population. It doesn't make rational sense.
Opposing a group who isn't even 1% of the population, which, again, numbers vary. It's hard to pin down. And a lot of people are still in the closet. But let's go with the less than 1%. Why oppose them? Why put the effort into that? It doesn't make rational sense. Unless there's money behind it.
I think the biggest influence on why this is being infiltrated into my field and in the medical profession is money. And this is coming from top down. And then the propaganda and the messaging fools people to believe that what they're doing is kind and nice and helpful.
I'm so glad she said that. The propaganda and the messaging is meant to fool people into thinking what they're doing is kind and nice and helpful. And it's not. They're doing harm. She's accidentally telling on herself and this entire propaganda film. Because we've seen the main character, the fictionalized version of Miss Martinez, who has repeatedly denied what her child has told her is true, and is supposed to be the sympathetic character, when she's clearly making the situation much, much worse on purpose, because she knows better than everyone else.
Human rights movements come from the ground up. They come up against corporate entities and governmental policies. They come from the people.
It's a political agenda, because you may have very large organizations, but there's a small group of people who are controlling
very small group of people who are controlling the agenda. I'm gonna make this full screen so you can view better.
These organizations, and they tend to be political.
This is all coming from the top of society. It's coming with great big gobs of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars being just...
PragerU's annual revenues hit $65 million in 2022. Why, if I'm not mistaken, that's twice what the Arcos Foundation has. How curious.
Funneled into all our institutions to drive this down into the culture.
We need to understand this isn't about helping people. This is about making money.
There's money to be made. It's a $1.5 billion industry for surgery alone.
Yeah, $1.5 billion for surgery alone. That previous thing that I just showed, North America, all of North America, not just the US, all of it, the sex reassignment surgery market value is $213 million, which is, again, nothing to sneeze at, but it's not the $1.5 billion that she lets on. And again, the source for this is in the description. This one, I believe, is the Acumen Research and Consulting disclosure statement for anybody who wants to dig that one up.
$5 billion industry for surgery alone.
This is just the political action committees contributing to Republican and conservative candidates, federal candidates, just the federal candidates from just the political action committees, almost $7 billion in 2021 to 2022. This next year is an election year. This is a fraction of the amount of money in politics. And they've made transgender a huge issue. But by all means, let's talk about the $213 million in the surgery pipeline.
Alone. And I think that's an underestimate.
She told me, Mom, I realize that no matter what I do, I'm never gonna be like my brother.
But to detransition, there was nothing available. I had to walk in complete darkness alone with one therapist who was willing to help me by the same time.
He was all alone with one therapist who was willing to help him. I mean, I do feel for his situation. There is a lack of assistance for people who want to detransition. That's true. Our system should do better. It should do better in helping identify the people who are experiencing other difficulties and cannot access other health care, like the story of Daisy that we reviewed previously, who was depressed and had self-harm ideation, but wasn't able to access any kind of mental health assistance. So the only thing she could do, as she put it, was escape her identity into another one that happened to be a transgender person. It still saved her life, but it's not the optimal way to go about things. That's not a problem with the trans movement. That's a problem with the way we handle mental health care here in the United States.
It's kind of assumed when these hormones are prescribed to trans people that they're going to stay on it for the rest of their life. None of the doctors I'd ever talked to said anything about this is what to do if you go off testosterone. I've gone to some dark places, but this was definitely the worst. I could barely get out of bed. It was a lot rougher than I thought it was going to be.
And that's really unfortunate for Kat. But why would a doctor do that? That's like if you break your arm and your arm's in a cast, and the doctor says this cast has to stay on for 6 weeks. They assume you're going to keep the cast on for 6 weeks. They're not going to detail to you what's going to happen if you try to take the cast off before 6 weeks. That's not the scope of what they're talking about. Now, if you go to your doctor and you talk to your doctor and say, I want to stop taking testosterone, then your doctor will tell you what's likely to happen, what you can expect. But you have to talk to your doctor, not just go do it.
Mental state was pretty much at its lowest. I often felt very suicidal. I didn't really know if I was gonna make it.
This is a hard part. If your mental state isn't ready for this, this would be a good place to go make a sandwich and come back later. Because I'm going to talk about something that is very unpleasant. What you just saw is exactly what you thought you saw. The other people, they laid out how they felt the maximum amount of self-harm ideation at the point where they decided to detransition or what have you. And then it went to a scene of Andrew, Evan in the fictionalized tale, did exactly what it looked like just happened. The real life Andrew stepped in front of a train. I used to have a little sister, and she hung herself. She did not have a good life. She had mental issues that my mother and her father could not handle, and they didn't deal with it very well. And because they couldn't handle her, she spent most of her time when she wasn't in school in her room. I remember when she was 4 years old. I had had a very, very bad day. It's not super important what happened, but I was sitting on a stairway and you know, feeling bad. And this 4-year-old little girl came over and says to me, "Don't cry. It's a beautiful night. The stars are out." She knew I loved the stars. She had a hard time. She didn't have a good life. But she was a sweet kid. The kid's mom and I were still together at the time, and she was about the same age as my oldest. So we took her whenever we could, and they spent a lot of time together, and they played together, and all those fun things. When that happened, there was a lot of hubbub, as often happens. Young teens are very vulnerable to that kind of ideation. I went through a period like that myself for different reasons. I don't think it's abnormal. As we saw the information from the Trevor Project, it's a lot of people have thoughts like that. There was a lot of pressure to find something to blame. Because even though the medical examiner had the week before put out an article in the local newspaper warning people that young teens were at a very, very high risk of self-harm ideation. That same medical examiner wanted to point a finger at someone because, as she told the newspaper, kids don't do that. Even though she herself had pointed out they in fact do just the week before. So, despite the information that was available, there was still a pressure to blame someone. The first instinct was, of course, to blame her father and my mother, because the way she was living, it was harmful, which is why the kid's mom and I took her as often as possible, so that she could have, some periods of normal childhood and, be around people who understood she had atypical behaviors and were able to handle it and accept her anyway. She did it when they weren't home. Unfortunately, my brother was home. So because he was the only person who was there, and someone had to have done it, despite all evidence to the contrary, well, in fairly short order, he found himself in prison. The reason I mention it now is because when a child unalives themselves, there is a tremendous amount of pressure to place blame. And ultimately, that's what this film has been building up to, is Andrew Martinez did unalive himself. And this entire film is intended to place the blame for that on transgender ideology. And it's fucking disgusting.
I received another phone call. I answer it, and this person asked me, "Are you Jaylee's mom?" and all these questions, and I say yes. I thought maybe they found my daughter. She asked me, "Are you driving?" When she asked me to park my car, I asked her, "No, don't ask me to park my car or get out of the freeway."
Due to the circumstances, there's nothing that you can recognize. I'm so sorry.
I got out of the car and I was throwing up. And I didn't want to believe that my daughter was gone.
I can very much empathize. When I got the phone call about my little sister, it destroys your world, It's always hard when a loved one is gone, particularly when they unalive themselves. But when it's someone who's so much younger than you, that you look at in a child kind of way. I mean, I've had to face all of my own fears. I don't really fear anything for myself. But the one remaining thing that still gives me nightmares from time to time is the idea that something might happen to my kids. I get it. When I got that phone call about my little sister, you don't want to live in this world anymore. It's devastating. But at the same time, she's doing everything she can to put the blame for this somewhere else. When even throughout the course of this fictionalized tale, we've heard over and over and over that transgender kids have a higher risk of unaliving themselves, that it's a danger. In fact, they overstated it several times. She was told to her face, this is a risk. And she did everything in her power to make it worse. This is exactly the consequence she was told would happen if she persisted in the behavior she was practicing. And then when it did happen, the way she was warned, it's everyone else's fault.
Are confused. These people are in pain, and they don't want anyone to know the truth.
And that's it right there, is she's a person who's in pain, who will not accept the truth.
I'd been living a lie, and I could not bear to live a lie identifying as a woman when I wasn't. And then I realized that anybody who's gone through this, it's the same thing.
Walt is pissing me off. Now this is an unrelated thing. Now that everyone's emotionally super vulnerable, he's saying, I realized I wasn't actually a woman. Therefore, since I was faking it, all trans people must be faking it. Just because it's true for Walt doesn't mean it's true for everyone. Just because Walt can fake migraines and get a prescription of Oxy doesn't mean no one on Earth has migraines.
They never changed their gender. We're just masquerading.
Create a dialogue in reaching out to doctors who may be curious about the truth that's happening with gender.
So there's a couple of things going on. First of all, notice the music has changed. It's no longer the dramatic, ominous something horrible. Now it's the light. We're past the storm. Things are starting to get better now. And that's reinforced by the messages of some of these other people. She's laying it out like she's a reasonable person who's having conversations and presenting information for the other side. And it sounds fantastic.
They will sit and listen to stories of parents talking about their children and detransitioners. Hopefully we can start persuading them that gender affirmation model shouldn't be the one size fits all.
What's this now? What are these labels? All that reasonable talk, and yet here she is sending out mailers with stickers that say sex is binary. Disorders of sexual development are not evidence that sex is on a spectrum. There are no true trans. Only women give birth. A woman is an adult human female. Humans cannot change sex, etc., etc. Don't believe this malarkey that she's a reasonable person just trying to spread sense. She is an extremist, and she's proud of it. She's just put on a mask of friendliness and rationality, but it's also fun to me that the filmmakers didn't try to hide this. They put this in plain sight.
I know that nothing that I do is going to return my daughter, but at least my hope is to save other families.
I certainly hope her story helps save other families, but it isn't going to happen from documentaries like this. Even the end of this movie misgenders Andrew. Dead name's Andrew. But there's good news. We can fix it. Andrew Martinez did end his own life by stepping in front of a train. But as you can see, he was not miserable about his transition. And a person who is in a group home and feels unwanted by their own family, it's really, really hard. And we can only imagine what other factors may have been at play in Andrew's life, because we only get Ms. Martinez's version of events. I'm glad he was able to find some joy in his life during the brief period he was around. We can at least respect the departed enough to give them their own damn name. Thank you all so much for watching. I understand this was a very difficult one, but as I said in the beginning, there's a lot, and all of it is important. If you found this content useful or enlightening, please consider hitting the subscribe button. If you know someone who could benefit from the information in this video, whether it's a questioning trans person or a person who simply doesn't know very much about trans people, do feel encouraged to share, and feel free to reach out to me on Discord or other social medias, or by email if you have any questions. And as always, remember, you don't have to blame victims for what was done to them, because you are better than religion.